All right. Hey, let's get into our meeting today. And Deborah, for those of you who haven't met Deborah, she is back here in the corner. She's my assistant, and she's more than my assistant. I call her my partner. She would try to call me boss, and I said, I don't like that. So we agreed on partner because we work well together, and I couldn't do what I do without her help. All right, minutes, which is one of the things that she's very good at. We have minutes for February 3rd, February 4th, February 9th, February 10th, February 16th, February 17th. They've been sent out to you. I believe they are in good order. If anybody has seen anything that they feel like needs to be addressed, we can look at that. I haven't heard back from anybody, but I would entertain a motion to have the minutes approved as written. Representative Clark is making the motion and Representative Murphy is seconding. Discussion on the minutes. Not seeing anything. I think that is just confirmation of Deborah's hard work. And we will go ahead and vote to pass out the minutes as written. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Representative Sampson, go ahead and raise your hand just for fun to make sure we're getting this. There you go. All right. And then I'm going to, by faith, believe that everybody in the other room said aye also. Unanimously passing out the minutes as written. All right. Nick, we're going to go in to working the two bills that I discussed yesterday. And the first one is House Bill 2038. And I'm going to, just to get the discussion rolling, I am going to make the motion to pass out House Bill 2038. And I would look for a second. Representative, my esteemed Vice Chair, Thomas, makes that motion. I know that there was questions that came up during the hearing, and I know that Jessa Farmer has been working with Nick and others just to get some answers to some of the discussion that came up in committee. And Nick, if you could just go through the bill again and then try to address the questions and concerns and comments that came up in committee so that we can, when we get into discussion of the bill, try to answer as many of those as possible, even through your discussion. Thank you, Nick.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Okay, committee, I'll start with just a quick brief of the bill to get everybody back onto the same page. So House Bill 2038 would create the Educator Protection Act. And as you all are aware, this act would provide excess professional liability insurance coverage to teachers and student teachers in Kansas. Currently, teachers have coverage under their school district through the Kansas Tort Claims Act, and then also teachers may have coverage through a union if the teacher is a member of a teachers union. What this bill would do is it would provide another level or another option of liability insurance coverage to teachers in the state, and the bill would apply to all licensed teachers and all student teachers holding a teacher's certificate. The bill would also establish a fund in the state treasury to be administered by the Commissioner of Insurance, and this fund would be used by the Commissioner to procure the insurance policy, establish the type of coverage limits, and the Commissioner would also establish the effective date of the coverage and administer the claims process. In committee, I know there were some questions about liability and amounts of liability and how often school district coverage insurance policies have been used, how often union insurance policies have been used. And I believe Jessa reached out to KSDE and to KNEA and the KANEAA. I hope I'm saying that correctly. To just kind of inquire if they had any information on how often claims have been made under their policies. KSDE said that they don't have a way of tracking that information, and didn't provide any solid numbers on that. And then also the two unions that were reached out to for information due to reasons that they provided, privacy concerns, they did not provide any specific information on claims filed pursuant to those insurance policies. One other further bit of information, this law is, or this proposal, this bill is modeled after kind of the Tennessee law on this topic. I think the chair mentioned that in one of the prior meetings. And the Tennessee claims that have been made under their state insurance policy for teachers that's similar to this, as of January of last year, 2020, there had been one claim made for $6,000 in that policy. And so I'd be happy to try to answer any other questions, but I think that kind of covers generally what some of the questions of the committee were during the hearing day.
Thank you, Nick. Questions from the committee for Nick? Representative Stockstill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we have any a fiscal note on this as to how much it would cost the state to acquire liability insurance on every teacher in the state?
So yes, there is a fiscal note available online, and I would encourage you to read that. The fiscal note, it says the fiscal note response from the insurance department did not have an estimate for the cost of premiums or an estimate for the cost to administer the program. The Division of Budget estimates that all costs for the program, including all administration costs, could be financed through existing resources of the insurance department or an appropriation from the state general fund. That's kind of in summary what the fiscal note is saying, but there's no set cost that the fiscal note is providing.
So when they say appropriation from the state general fund, are they saying they just don't know how much this would cost, and if it does cost something, it would come out of the state general fund?
That I don't know. I will say that the bill establishes a fund to be used to procure the insurance policy, and no monies as of right now are being appropriated to that fund. So take that for what you will.
And I can just add to that a little bit. I do believe that this could be handled within the insurance department without cost, because it is something that is just not going to be costly. But I have spoken with the speaker, and if necessary, the speaker would do what would be necessary to make sure that if funds were needed, that we would include that in an omnibus type of, of funding if necessary. And that's the way it's worded, the way it is. Again, the speaker believes, as I do, that this is a way of telling teachers that we got your back, and it can be done very cheaply. I did speak with Gary Siegel, who, and again, you mixed up those acronyms a little bit. It's KNAAE.
Oh, okay.
And so he said he had spoken with a financial person at the national level for his organization, and he did find out that it just wasn't something that was costly. He said that this is an issue that is starting to happen in other states. And that's why I felt like I have a daughter who is a teacher, and I am very proud of her. And I just respectfully said, I would hope that, that you wouldn't join the KNEA. And that's just my personal beliefs on my experiences. And again, I believe for many people, the KNEA is an effective tool or an organization that supports teachers who are like-minded to negotiate, to provide teacher learning opportunities, mentoring, a lot of good things. But for myself, that was just my personal opinion. And I said that even when I found out about this bill, I had told her about the tort claims and that she shouldn't be concerned about her need for any protection, which is what she was told when they made the pitch to her to join. So that's my motivation for this bill. And again, the costs are very minimal. Leadership is behind this bill and will provide what's necessary if the Department of Insurance feels like that it is a strain for them in any way to provide this type of coverage. And so that's why it's my desire to make the motion to kick it out today. And that's why even through working with Nick and Jessa, as we've tried to see if this is something that could turn out to be above what I or any others might have envisioned, and it's just not happening, and it hasn't happened. And but for teachers who are not a member of an organization, this tells them that we have their back, and it is something that I believe is very pro-teacher. And that's why I am strongly advocating for its passage. Questions from the committee? Representative Sampson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nick, a question following up on the good representative from Prairie Village's inquiry. I believe he said, and if I'm mistaken, please let me know, but I think he said the cost for liability insurance for every teacher in the state. Can you help me understand, is this like an opt-in program if you want the insurance? I understand that there may be other options available either through unions or from individual school districts, but is this a choice that the teachers get to make, or is this automatically cover every teacher in the state?
Yes, so the bill specifies in new section 4 on page 2 that the professional liability coverage provided under this act shall cover all full-time and part-time teachers and student teachers. So this would be just blanket coverage for all teachers in the state.
And it's backup. It's backup coverage. It's not primary.
And who bears the cost of the insurance if it's provided either through the school districts or the unions? My understanding being that for the instant bill, the state of Kansas would pick up the tab for our teachers. I'm curious if that is similar for the school district's coverage, which may be a primary coverage, or the union's coverage, which may be a primary coverage, if you will.
I would presume that the school districts are procuring their own insurance policies through available funds that they have. That's just part of their operating costs. The union coverage, you would, as a teacher, you would be having union dues come out of your paycheck or paying for to be a member of the union, and all the benefits that the union offers to teachers, such as the insurance coverage.
Last question, if I may, Mr. Chair, for Nick. And I know I've looked through the fiscal note. Can you please help me make sure I'm understanding accurately what the cost of, so if this is the government, and generally I'm opposed to government getting into some things, but for the right reasons, I'd love to have headlines in the, I'm looking at the February 11th Topeka Capital Journal. I wish I was in committee, Mr. Chairman, because I'd show this to the committee. But this headline reads, and it's the front headline, House Civics Test Bill Creates Tension. I know that's our other bill today, but I would love for today's headline to send the people of Kansas a positive message that we've done something positive for our teachers. And so I'm trying to understand, if the state of Kansas is going to provide this, which I understand to be more of an optional, or at least from the standpoint of teachers don't get one of the primary coverages, they at least have a fallback coverage. What is the cost administratively for the state of Kansas to provide this? It sounds like maybe not much through one of our departments that already exist. And then, if Tennessee is accurate for Kansas's experience, it sounds like there may not be very many claims. But if you could help me understand that, and I know that's not exactly revise our legal material, but that's what I'm trying to understand here.
Yeah, certainly. So another line in the fiscal note that I'm looking at is in the second paragraph of the fiscal note. It says, it makes note of The bill would provide that the fund would cover the costs associated with the administration of the fund, along with the purchase of any insurance policies by the insurance commissioner for the program. So it seems like the fiscal note is contemplating that the fund is going to have some monies to procure that policy and be used to pay out claims. The next paragraph says that the Division of Budget estimates that all costs for the program, including all administration costs, could be financed through existing resources of the insurance department or an appropriation from the state general fund.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions from the committee? Representative Byers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nick, my question is this. Without us honoring our teachers through due process, is it possible for a school district, say anything were to occur, to let go of that teacher and then the state be stuck as the primary for providing that insurance instead of it going through a normal tort system?
I'm not sure how that would operate. I assume if the tort occurred while the teacher was employed, the insurance, if it's an occurrence-based insurance policy, the insurance would cover based on when the occurrence happened.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions, Representative Stogstill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Right now, Nick, are you aware of any school district, the state of Kansas, that does not carry liability insurance on its teachers?
No, I'm not aware of that. The Tort Claims Act allows school districts to be sued up to $500,000 for tort claims. So I believe school districts probably carry coverage to cover that.
So right now, the order of priority on this is that if a teacher is in that position, they are covered first by the school district's liability insurance. And then if the school district declines for some reason or another and they are a member of KNEA, then the KNEA insurance would come into play at that point. And I believe we talked about early on in this that there weren't any recorded cases of a teacher being turned down by both the school district and KNEA through there. So we've never had an instance where the state would have to come in and cover that teacher or a teacher with liability insurance. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of that. This bill doesn't specify an order of priority specifically. That would be probably done with the procurement of the policy of what I assume the order of priority could be set based on the policy that the insurance commissioner procures under this bill.
Thank you.
Further questions from the committee? Representative Gore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nick, if we have a $500,000 liability, wouldn't additional insurance actually put a target on these teachers' backs as opposed to helping them?
Yeah, that's a question I can't answer for you. That's kind of getting more into a policy argument, and I can't answer that as a reviser. I'm sorry.
Well, it's been my experience that if you have a limit, that is all the insurance companies can sue you for. And if I am a trial attorney, I'm going to go after the person that's got the most insurance. So I think we are simply setting our teachers up with a target on their back and saying, hey, come and get me. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
And it's my understanding that through existing tort claims, that is not even an issue right now with the $500,000 that's out there already. So it wouldn't be an issue if it's never been an issue in the past. But further questions from the committee? I will say, even, you know, with the discussion coming up about tenure due process, that, you know, if we do kick this out and it comes up above the line, that it would be an opportunity to have that discussion on the floor And it would be a good discussion to have. I am confident that, you know, any attempts to either add it onto this bill or even to do a gut and go would not succeed, but it would give good discussion to that issue. And I would welcome the opportunity, even in this committee, we've had that discussion to some degree, but I fully know that even as we do bill briefs and we make an explanation and we talk about are there possible amendments, I would tell my leadership that that would be a possible amendment that would come up for discussion. And I believe, again, I would welcome and believe that would be good discussion to have. And we would see how that would play out on the floor if that did come up. Further questions? Representative Stockstill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will oppose this mainly because I think it's unnecessary. As I say, I'm not aware of any situation that's come up in the state of Kansas where a teacher has not been covered either by school district liability insurance or KNEA insurance. I think I kind of agree with the previous representative. We're kind of putting a target on the back of some of these teachers. And I think that just to put legislation out there that really doesn't address a problem is a problem. So I'll be voting no on this, and I think our teachers are well covered, and if they weren't, I'd be the first one to vote yes on this. Thank you.
Further questions or comments before we vote? Representative Feathers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to apologize. I'm looking through my notes from February 4th when we discussed this bill, and I didn't write this down. I apologize for this, but I thought that it was said on the 4th that this was not an anti-NEA bill, that it was not really, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so I didn't write that down. So I'm a little confused is not really the right word. I'll just say confused right now, where I think we're sending a mixed message because respectfully, you just said you hoped your daughter wouldn't join NEA, and we said this bill wasn't anti-NEA, and that's a real, I would think to teachers, a confusing message as to what our intent is.
I can very clearly explain that. My intent is not for any teacher that desires to work with or join the NEA to discourage that. But I do believe that many teachers are told that they need to join in order to have this type of backup coverage. And my intent is to say that any teacher should know that they don't have to. If they desire to, they can. And there's nothing in this bill that would prohibit it or discourage it. But it's a little bit of truth in advertising in the sense that, again, in my 30 years in education, I've heard from numerous teachers who that was the selling point for joining. And so to me, it shouldn't be the selling point. The selling point should be the negotiations that the union brings, the teacher collective bargaining, the teacher training, the mentoring, the other things that unions do is ample reason for someone to choose. And I'm in no way opposed to that. But I do believe that this should not be a reason why, and by passing this bill, it never would be again. And so that's the primary intent for the passage. And I do believe that's a valid reason to pass the bill, despite what my ranking minority member said. That alone is a reason to tell teachers that the state of Kansas is going to make sure that we have their back in those circumstances. Further questions? Representative Sampson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-up question, I guess. I think I understand, and I've done enough insurance cases to understand that the more liability protection that's available, the more money that's potentially there. And yes, those darn trial lawyers tend to go after them more. But I guess I want to make sure I understand, even if they do go after the teachers, which I think every single person in this room would agree is not a good thing. But if they do go after the teachers, I guess I'm a little bit confused as to, it seems like they already have insurance coverage on the one hand, but on the other hand, if they do go after the teachers, this is just another level of, albeit optional or secondary coverage, that if they go after the teachers, it's not ultimately the teachers, it's the state of Kansas that would be having their back, if you will. And so, I mean, I see pros and cons to all of it, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding that, you know, instead of the headline in the newspaper being, you know, target on the back of teachers, it's ultimately you're going after the state of Kansas's pocketbook, unless I'm misunderstanding something.
And again, I think that even as Nick explained, you know, to say what you just said is that, you know, people are going to go after the unions for that very same reason, and that's just not happening. And so this would not increase the possibility of that happening any more than it's already happening through backup coverage that a union provides, because as far as expanding it, it's already there and it's not happening. And so this is just another way for a teacher to have that backup, even if they're not a member of a union.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I find this, I would share, but not just for the people in this committee. I suspect most people have already got their minds made up, although I find this to be an incredibly difficult vote, and I don't know that I do have my mind made up. But maybe more importantly, I've seen through some other comments on the floor and elsewhere that our friends in the media are taking notes, and this seems to be a topic of interest, or at least our second one will be. But I guess my thought with this thing being, I do want the public to know that I have leaned very heavily on leadership, that I do think the teacher due process stuff, it doesn't necessarily have to be in that form, but I do think the nature of teachers, especially in our public schools, that warrants consideration. I think that requires, or at least warrants consideration sooner rather than later. I don't think we get our best results if that's going to occur on the House floor. So I'm not sharing anything that's a secret here, but I do hope that's something that we work in earnest on, hopefully in this committee, and whether that's this session or next session. And like I said, whether it's due process or something better, I don't have the strongest feelings on, but I do think this committee very strongly, regardless of partisan labels, supports our teachers. So I hope that's something that we can consider as we move forward, and regardless of how today's vote turns out. So I appreciate everybody's time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I appreciate even yesterday the offline discussion we had on these issues, and you know my support for looking forward and willingness to work on this. Thank you. Further questions from the committee? Representative Burkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there a limit on the amount of liability that the state would have per teacher, or just in general?
Through the tort claims, it's $500,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Poskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am concerned that, as the representative said, that the media is watching, and I'm worried that what they're going to say is that we gave teachers something that didn't cost anything that they will very rarely ever need to use instead of due process.
And again, I'm not replacing anything that's not already being discussed, even when a teacher says, well, do I need to join a union for this? This is saying you don't. If you decide to for other reasons, that's great, but at least teachers know that they have the backup coverage no matter what. So, further questions from the committee? Representative Byers.
In my 29 years of being in the classroom in Wichita schools, the United Teachers of Wichita, you know, every year encouraged us to become members of the union. And not once did someone use this to highlight that they would provide liability insurance. We had a lot of other things, including negotiations that we would talk about, all the way down to discounts on movie theater tickets. But that professional liability was also a part of the discussion, but it wasn't the main lead. My concern is that at the root of this, if we're trying to honor our teachers, providing this from the state, which, by the way, to acquire a professional liability insurance policy on your own is not very costly. It's something you can do out of your own pocket very easily. But to do that, we go back to actually honoring those teachers by giving them something that would protect them due process, and not necessarily just throwing an insurance policy out there that would rarely be used. I oppose this.
Thank you. Further questions? All right, and I appreciate that this is probably going to be maybe a close vote, and so we're going to go ahead and just do a roll call vote. And I'll let my vice chairman. He has a list, and we'll just start at the top of the list. Not me.
Representative Stogsdill.
No.
Representative Bergkamp. Representative Byers.
No.
Representative Clark. Representative Collins.
No.
Is he in there?
I vote no.
Mr. Vice Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt. Would you mind announcing what the votes are? We just can't hear online.
Oh, okay, yeah. Representative Stogsdill votes no. Representative Bergkamp votes yes. Representative Byers votes no. Representative Clark votes no. Representative Collins votes no. Representative Donahue.
Aye.
Representative Donahue votes aye. Representative Estes.
I vote aye.
Representative Estes votes aye. Representative Featherstone.
Featherstone, in honor of my husband, I vote no.
Representative Featherstone votes no. Representative Murphy.
Aye.
Representative Murphy, aye. Representative Orr. Representative Orr, no. Representative Poskin.
I vote no.
Representative Poskin votes no. Representative Samsel.
Aye.
Representative Samsel votes aye. Representative Sanders. Representative Sanders votes aye. Representative Schreiber.
No.
Representative Schreiber votes no. Representative Wolf Moore.
No.
Representative Wolf Moore votes no. Representative, I'm talking to myself. I will vote aye. And
Chairman votes aye also.
with a vote of 9-7, the motion fails.
Thank you, committee. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to 2039. Yes.
Yeah, there's 17 members. The chair votes when there's a tie break. So the vote were 7 ayes, 9 nays. And the chairman would like to be recorded as an aye. So the vote is 8 in favor, 9 against.
All right, committee. Next, we're going to move on to 2039. And I will open the discussion because I have already sent out a balloon language, and I'm going to have Nick explain that. So once we get into the discussion, I'll make the motion to amend 2039 with the balloon language that's been prepared. And I will note that there was one additional whereas from the initial balloon that I handed out that has been added by Nick. And so before I make the motion, I'm going to let Nick go through the balloon language. And I will tell you, when we kicked this bill out without recommendation, I was working closely with Randy Watson and the state board. And so that's why I wasn't so worried about without recommendation, because I never believed there was going to be the initial language that was going to be kicked out. I have gotten a lot of positive feedback as far as the changes I've made, and I believe that as far as what I've done, the state board still believes that the turf of them making these types of decisions is in their hands, and that's why they are not, I can't come to you with the fact that I have their support on my balloon language other than for that very reason. So I'm gonna have Nick just go through the areas where I have tried to address concerns that came up in the committee, and that was primarily the high stakes nature of a test that was written out in the original bill and the costs of the bill. Those two primary concerns have been addressed in this amendment. There were some secondary concerns that came up that also are addressed in my balloon, but I'm going to let Nick go walk through the entire balloon so that everybody is aware of what the balloon reads and how it changes the original bill that was proposed. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chair, I'll just start with a quick overview of the bill as it exists right now. And committee, as you are aware, House Bill 2039 would require each student enrolled in an accredited high school beginning in the 9th grade to pass a civics examination. And this examination, as you all are aware, would consist of 100 questions that are substantially similar to the United States Citizenship and Naturalization test. And this test would be required for graduation from high school. That's kind of the basis of the underlying bill. And moving on to the balloon committee, you notice some whereas clauses there at the beginning. The first set of whereas clauses, the first three are supporting the state board's efforts to promote civics education and recognizing that, but also recognizing that the state board has changed the assessment from a 60-item objective test to a performance task assessment, and that to assist with kind of future educational policies and continue to promote civics education in schools, that there needs to be some objective measurable results. And it also lists out a location where teachers could access what's to come, what I'm getting ready to discuss in the balloon. What this balloon does in the substance of it is it strikes that requirement to have the 100-item question test required for graduation. It then puts the this required civics examination within the already required course of instruction for high schoolers for history, government, social studies courses. So this course of instruction would have to require students to pass a basic civics test or series of tests comprising of 60 questions that are randomly selected from that naturalization examination. The test may be administered through multiple choice exams or practice tests that are provided online. And then each accredited high school would be required under this balloon to submit reports and aggregate student achievement data on examination data. And Mr. Chair and committee, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions if there are any for me.
Questions from the committee? Representative Stogstill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the original bill, there was a $400,000 fiscal note. Has that changed?
So that fiscal note applies to the underlying language of the bill. If this balloon is stating that the examinations can be administered or may be administered through the multiple choice practice test provided online. So the balloon is referencing a free examination that's provided online.
Thank you. I think I'll be asking a couple more questions along that line once we get back to the bill. Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my understanding of this is going to go from a 100 test question down to 60. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And so then it says 60 questions selected randomly. I noticed in reading through that that test, which I think actually had like about 128 questions, but there were very distinct different areas. Would that just be randomly selected from the 100, or would it be divided into sections and questions randomly pulled from the like sections?
Yeah, the balloon doesn't specify how to pick those questions. It just specifies that as part of this course of instruction, students would be required to pass a 60-question test, and it could be split up into multiple tests. And those questions have to just be randomized based on the naturalization test.
I can provide a little more feedback. As I spoke with Matt Klusner, my government teacher from Valley Center, you know, he's using this test already. There is no cost. And he's doing it within the framework of his class. And that's the intent of this balloon, to allow, you know, all teachers to be able to do that. The high stakes nature is taken away because it's folded into the class. And even passing or not passing the test, you know, for the naturalization, it's 60%. But for a teacher, as he determines how a student passes his class, this is just one piece of that. And then for a teacher to make the determination, this is not the determination of whether you pass the class or not. It's just a teaching tool that he's using. And I circled back to 60 questions because that was what was on the state's biennial test that has been dropped. And the reason why I focus on that is I still believe that we do need, and that's one of the whereases, measurable objective data to help us to understand how our students are doing and how we do better in the future. I had considered, you know, having a request to bring back that test, but I didn't want to put it into this bill because that would muddy up the waters. I have had discussions as far as the nature of the task-based assessment that has replaced the test. That was the biennial test given by the state board in the past. And believe it is a good subjective natured test, but it's in no way an objective measure. And that's why even asking for data to be gathered at the local level and at the state level is still a tool for us to understand how our kids are doing. But in no way is this a qualifying factor on whether a teacher makes a determination on somebody who's taking a government class, a make or break or a reason why someone wouldn't pass the class that is a requirement for graduation.
Okay, so then I'd like to follow up with that. So the test would be required, but the teacher would have the option of determining the weighting of the test, and that a student could still pass the class without getting a passing grade on the test.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
And then even through that, later in the bill, there is just the ability for the state board through rules and regs to make any necessary clarifications. I'm not trying to micromanage that process. They already have that ability, and this would give further authority for them to spell that out. So, Representative Poskins.
Just a little confused because it specifically says such course of instruction shall require students to pass a basic civics test. So I'm confused that you could not pass the test but still pass the course, because it says right here that they have to pass as part of the course.
Well, and again, you know, how a teacher weights a test that is taken, this allows for a teacher to allow that test to be given as many times as necessary. And then even as a teacher decides how, you know, if a student after taking it 3 times gets 35, not 36, well, they could take it again. But even in that, you know, they could take it until they got to whatever the teacher determined was a passing of that test based on how they would do it. Basically, you know, it could be like considered practice tests to the point where a teacher made the determination. But then again, that's just a piece of what a teacher decides is needed for, you know, ultimately the other parts of a class that the teacher is teaching, not the sole determination.
Okay, but it does say such course shall require students to pass the civics test. So I guess that's confusing to me. If the teacher's going to be able to weight it, when you cannot pass a test and still get a B in a class, you know, depends on, but this says that they have to pass the test. I mean, that's what the language in front of me says.
And again, I believe that it's written in a way that allows a teacher to continue to allow them to take that test as many times as necessary to get there. And so, Representative Estes, did you have a clarifying?
See that?
Well, if I may dovetail onto the question, so are you saying that they can pass it in one test, or a teacher can take correct answers from multiple tests until they find 60 right answers?
A teacher can determine, based on their administering and working with the student, what it requires to pass that class. That decision is in the teacher's hand. And it's a part of even then the determination by a teacher to decide whether or not a student is passing the class for graduation. And as far as I am aware of, no student has ever not graduated because of not completing a civics class. And the bill, I believe, is written in a way that that would not change in any way with this requirement.
So then if a teacher wants to say 20% is a pass?
As far as what a teacher decides is, that's in the teacher's hands, and I'm not changing that. The teacher determines, on any test and on any determination of a student passing their class, that is in the teacher's purview.
Thank you.
Representative Samsel. Before we get into a lot of questions as far as if they are for Nick, I want to get into making the motion and having a chance to have further discussion. So I appreciate we're kind of getting into nuts and bolts as opposed to even for questions for Nick. So if your question is for Nick, go ahead and ask it. And if not, I'm going to go ahead and make the motion so that we can have further discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe my questions were actually for you, so I'll withhold them till the proper time.
Okay. Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nick, could you just show me where the language is that says that teachers have a say in how this goes? I just don't see the words in the bill.
So yeah, as you're reading, the course of instruction shall require students to pass a basic civics test or series of tests comprising of 60 questions. There's no language to just prohibit teachers making any decisions of the administration of that test. There's no language there that specifies a passing grade. You're reading the balloon as it exists now, and there's no language to prohibit any of those things, I will say.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and make the motion that the amendment, the balloon language, be considered for passage so that we could then pass out the bill as amended. And I'll look for a second. Representative Thomas seconds. All right. We've already had some good discussion. And I'm just going to say a few more things before we get into questions. I do believe there's value in doing this. And I have worked to address the concerns that have been raised, and I believe the balloon language does that. Is this going to be, end all and be all? No, but by updating a statute that's already in place, that addresses one of the primary concerns from the state board, in that we're getting on their turf because it's already in statute. And I'm just updating a statute that will allow all school districts to recognize that this needs to be something that we look at doing better. I talk about Plan, Do, Check, Act, and this is a chance for us in an area where even when you look at the state assessments that have gone on for years, we're not doing well. The NAEP, which is considered the gold standard, shows 24% are at or above proficiency. So that means 3 out of 4 students are not where we want them to be. My hope is to do better. And I believe that you can all join me in having that same hope on doing what's best for our kids and helping them to do better. I want you to just see a book, and I know for those in the room, if you're on your laptops, you can see it. I have a colleague that's great-grandmother. It's called Our Government. It was printed by the state of Kansas, and it's from 1923. And it's an 8th grade textbook on what we used to require of students in the area of civics education. You know, 8th grade. And I guarantee you that for me and everyone in this class, this would be challenging material. 100 years later almost, the civics citizenship test given by the naturalization on what we require for citizens to become citizens, it's baby steps. And you heard that testimony from one of my colleagues and constituents that testified during the hearing who took the test. He said, Steve, surely this isn't, you know, we can do better than this, can't we? And I said, this is, again, it's baby steps. It's a way for us to shine the light on an area that we can do better on, and then work with the state board with something that they've already initiated through their civics advocacy network. I've gotten a lot of good information on what they're doing with that network, and that civics advocacy network was a response to Attorney General Schmidt 6 years ago when he made the same request to the state board that this bill initially made. And all I can say after 6 years is that I like what the Civics Advocacy Network attempts to do. I would have loved to put it into my bill in a way that would require all school districts to start utilizing the curriculum and material that is a part of that network. But that would be, again, in their purview, an overstep. But I can say in 6 years that it is not widely being used. Maybe 10% of school districts after 6 years. And so here we are, even 6 years later, saying, are we seriously trying to look at how we can teach the basics of civics, our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, all the different things that are a part of a civics class, and including the basic concepts of voting and being informed and recognizing that's how our government works. This is a way to do better, and it allows us to allow that to be looked at across the state with all school districts in a way that we can see how our students are doing. It's no longer high stakes, and it no longer costs anything. And it's my attempt to say that this is a very valid attempt to find compromise. I do believe that the state board, even when the bill was kicked out without recommendation, felt like I was negotiating from a position of weakness, and I don't believe that's the case. But I do believe that as we move forward, that there's still a chance, even before this bill would go before the floor, or if it went to the Senate, where we could continue to work together to find a compromise that everybody could agree with. I would hope you would support this balloon because it helps us meet a need for our students. I think that's very recognizable. I have gotten, you would not believe the amount of positive support that I have gotten on this bill. The television interviews, radio interviews, working with newspapers, the Kansas City Star. I was shocked after having a discussion with them, and I've never gotten anything positive from the Kansas City Star, and yet I think I've sent this out to you too. What's so wrong with Kansas school civics test? Everybody says, this is a good idea. And that was the original bill. 20 states are already doing what was in my original bill. So this is, I'm not breaking new territory. My compromise is not what I would prefer, but it is an honest attempt to find compromise. And with that, I will allow others to speak and ask questions of me or any other input that you might have about the balloon language that has been proposed. Further questions from the committee? Stock still.
So are we going to be voting on each one of these balloons individually or as a group?
As a group.
Okay. And I had a question about a couple of these.
Okay.
It says, such course of instruction shall require students to pass a basic civics test or series of tests. What if they don't?
Again, that question was pretty fully discussed recently. It's in the purview of the teacher to make the determination of what if they don't, how they take the test again, how they work to determine are they learning the material that the teacher requires is necessary for them to get a passing grade in a civics government class.
Okay, so on the second question I had was on the third balloon here, it says each accredited high school shall submit to the State Board of Education an annual report that provides aggregate student achievement data for the basic civics test required pursuant to this subsection. You know, our teachers are absolutely inundated with paperwork these days. It seems like they do more paperwork than teaching, and this is going to require teachers to report these specific test results and so on to their schools, who are then going to have to pass it on to the state board, which is then going to have to take staff time to put these reports, basically put all that information together into a report that then they submitted to us once a year. And I think that's part of the reason why in my 5 years on this committee, I don't think I've ever seen the Teachers Association, the Administrators Association, the School Boards Association, and the State Board of Education oppose a bill. And they all oppose this bill. And I think that's one of the reasons, is because we need our teachers teaching. And they have way too much paperwork as it is. This is just more paperwork. This to me says that these teachers are already doing this in their classes, and they are assessing that the proficiency of their students in civics and so on by the grades and so on that they give them coming out of those classes. So again, I can't vote for these balloons, and I just don't think I could probably vote for the underlying bill, but thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Representative Byers.
And I would echo what the previous speaker just said. When we look at the graduation requirements in Kansas, you have to have 3 units of history and government. And it specifically states that they have to include world history, United States government, which includes the Constitution of the United States. When you look at the standards that are embedded, that are required, that they teach to, when we look at the government standards, we talk about it's understanding principles of checks and balance, the separation of powers, the organization of 3 branches of government, et cetera. It's all embedded already in the standards and the graduation requirements. Now, locally controlled school boards then direct their teachers to apply those standards within the classes. And those teachers, they test to find out, 1, what the students have learned, but also 2, to find out how they are teaching. And if the students are not learning that, they need to revise their teaching standards or whatever so they can keep doing this. But this is already in place. And we're basically reinventing the wheel with this and putting it down and adding one more step to a teacher's already overburdened schedule. And again, if we're talking about honoring teachers, does this give honor, or does this honor a teacher by saying, we don't think you're doing your job, so now we're going to require you to do this?
There's no intent to dishonor. I have great respect for teachers. Even this test is in standard. And as far as what we want students to learn. So it's a part of standards today. And yet, like I said, the tests that have been, been given for years, and even the NAEP scores showing 3 out of 4 students not where we want them to be. And so, again, as I stated before, my goal is to say, how can we do better and get, to move so that more students are on a NAEP score, or even if we would go back to an assessment that we've given for years on civics history and social studies. To have data, because right now we have, with the dropping of that test, no data. And for the legislature to be able to continue as we appropriate, we do some small things in order to say, are we assessing? Are we getting for the value for the money, that all of our patrons want us to do? This is a way to do that. And again, I believe that as I've talked with teachers, You know, and again, even with Matt Klusner, he said years ago when he first used this test, he was surprised. And he used that as motivation for him internally to say, I want my kids to do better. And he started recognizing this was a way for his kids to do better. And so that's all I'm saying. And I believe every teacher desires for their kids to do better. And this is a tool that helps them to work with their kids to do better, to learn basic things that are part of everything that you just said. I'm not in any way trying to minimize that. I respect and say that with everything you said, we can do better. And, you know, it's time for us to do this. And even recently, I talked with Derek Schmidt. And he said, how are you doing, Steve? You think you're going to be able to kick it out? I said, well, I think I have a good chance based on the balloon language that I'm going to propose to compromise and get to that point. And he just said, I really hope you can, because it's still something that I recognized was important in the past. And he said, although we discussed the Civics Advocacy Network, and they did talk to him about what they did in that area. He agrees that that is a good program that should be more widely used in our schools, but he then brought it back to the basic point that I am having with my bill and that he had when he came to the state board 6 years ago. We need to do better, and I don't believe there's a teacher in the state that wouldn't agree that we need to do better, and this bill will help us by updating a statute that already requires that they pass the class, do better. And that's all I'm saying is we can and should do better. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate your passion for this. I certainly do. I just feel like we've already got this built in. It's already there. And, you know, we bring up NAEP scores, and correct me if I am wrong, but my understanding is when we talk about proficiency levels and NAEP scores, each state determines what they consider proficient. And so the NAEP scores simply allow us to compare one state's proficiency cut with another state's proficiency cut, but they're not percentile scores. So they can change between upon states. So if we're not meeting ours, it's because we set a higher standard.
I don't think that's accurate, but that's really not the intent of this bill.
I understand that, but you know, my point goes back to, again, and I appreciate the fact that other government teachers are willing to use the naturalization test as part of their stuff, but that is a teacher's choice as to how they want to, and even according to the amendments you have here, the teacher makes the decision on how they test and what they do. Teachers are already doing that. And I think that this is simply adding more burden to where they're already doing what they can to accomplish this. And more than likely, even if this were to pass, teachers wouldn't change what they do. They would simply record that what they are doing meets those standards that we're setting forth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions, Representative Sampson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question, and we did have about an hour discussion on this yesterday, I think. And this is another bill that seems, for me at least, to be somewhat difficult. But when I'm back in my district, I use the phrase often, teamwork makes the dream work. And I would just like to make sure I understand who you worked with the State Board of Education, if anyone, and kind of share what that experience has been like, if you could, please. Because to me, there's much bigger. I look at the Constitution, and we have a role to play working very closely and hopefully in partnership with the State Board of Education, or otherwise this isn't going to work well for anybody. And I'm curious what your experience has been, in your words, if you could share that with this committee, if you don't mind.
I can do that. I know that this year, even as I pre-filed the bill and then started getting ready for my hearing, and I put a lot of effort into having a very good hearing. That was one of the best hearings that I've been involved with. Brad Newslander, I asked questions, and it was at that point in time that I found out that that the biennial test had been dropped and had been replaced with a task-based subjective assessment. So I asked for more information on that, and then I asked for previous results from that assessment that the state does, and I got results for 16 and 18. 14 was dropped because of technical issues, and then the test was dropped last year because of the pandemic. I expressed an interest then working with State Board and with Randy Watson, and I had a chance then to get on their agenda. And so It was just about, I think, 3 weeks ago that we went over, and I had 15 minutes. And at the end of the 15 minutes, I tried to wrap up my testimony, and Jim Porter, of State Board, said, no, this is good. Let's keep going. Let's keep having this discussion, because it's a part of a bigger discussion of how the legislature works with the State Board. And so it was very productive. At the end of that discussion, Jim asked me, what do you think would be the next step? And I said, I think Randy and I can sit down and talk and find compromise and do that. And we've had 3 conversations since then. And again, I think he appreciates that I am making a good faith effort. I do believe, like I said, that kicking the bill out with that recommendation kind of lessened their feelings that they needed to get to an agreement on a compromise, which is what happened last year, because last year we got to the point where their compromise language was changing shall to may. And, you know, that was something that I agreed to, because I felt like it was still a chance to move the issue forward. And that's what I'm trying to do now. And I do believe that even moving forward, there's more opportunities to have the discussions and negotiations that can address the issues that are even being raised right now. That's the way the process is supposed to work. And that's why I'm trying to do this in a way that goes back to Schoolhouse Rocks. For those of you who are not young enough to remember, I am a bill. Well, that's what I'm doing right now, even with the process of how a bill becomes law. And it's a very interesting process that I greatly appreciate. And so,
Mr. Chairman, and the reason I ask in particular is what I gathered from it, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but we have to have a level playing field. I get that the State Board of Education is the experts, as they should be. They should be our deep divers into policy. But I also know, well, I suspect that every single person on this committee works pretty dang hard to understand and knock on doors for the 23,000 people in our district. And the good Representative Parker earlier from the House floor mentioned how our duties go beyond just proponents and opponents, but to all 23 of those people. And it starts to, just being frank, I get a little bit irritated when it feels like our chairman of our education committee, whether you agree with him on the particulars of this bill or not, is bending over backwards to work with people. And I get the impression, I haven't been at the table, but I get a little bit angry when it feels like that's not being receptive. So that's a lot of my frustration as we sit here today. I recall testimony from the opponent saying, this really isn't the way to go about this. You ought to have a resolution. Well, we sit here today and there still is no resolution, and we have a bill in front of us. I suspect if we were to ask who drafted most of this language, it was probably mostly done by our good chairman without much input, or at least half-hearted input from some of the opponents or from the other players involved. So that's why, as much as I struggle with some of the specifics of this bill, if it really takes passing this out of committee with the favorable recommendation to get everybody's best efforts to find a solution for what probably is everybody's biggest concern is our students, and making sure they understand civics and how our government works. I mean, that tends to make me think that I'm in favor of this thing, even though I might otherwise not be. So those are my thoughts, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your continued input and passion for this. Hopefully when it leaves this committee, we'll have a good headline in the Topeka Capital Journal and other places tomorrow, but we'll see how that goes. Thank you.
well, I've learned not to worry about what I read in the newspaper. Thank you, though, for your comments. Further discussion before we vote. Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to vote in favor of this bill, but I do want to express that I'm disappointed with the balloon language. I think it waters it down way more than it ought to be watered down, but I appreciate your efforts to do something to reach some sort of compromise that we can pass this out favorably. But as far as I'm concerned, requiring a civics test with a set passing score should be a no-brainer. I mean, that should absolutely be required, and there should absolutely be a standard, but we're not going to get there today. And so I appreciate your efforts to reach some kind of a compromise here. So I will be voting yes, but I am disappointed that it had to be watered down as much as it has been.
Well, this is a lot better than last year. And so I'm going to take what I can get as far as moving the issue forward. And again, Plan, Do, Check, Act. You always continuous quality improvement. That's what I learned at 26 years at Boeing. And you always have to have that as your goal. I wish I could be doing better too right now, but it's a good faith at finding a compromise. And even Randy said, he said, I think we're like 90% plus there. Well, okay, let's get to 100%. Even doing what we're going to do today moves us to getting to 100% of finding the best possible solution. Further questions or comments from the committee before we vote? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and we're going to vote on the amendment, the balloon language. And then if the balloon does pass, then we'll pass out the bill as amended. So with that, Mr. Vice Chair, I'll let you use this. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do it the same way as we did the last one.
Okay. Representative Stogsdill.
No.
Representative Bergkamp.
Aye.
All right, Stogsdill votes no. Bergkamp votes yes. Representative Byers.
No.
Representative Byers votes no. Representative Clark. Representative Clark votes yes. Representative Collins.
Yes.
Representative Collins votes yes. Representative Donahue.
Aye.
Representative Donahue votes aye. Representative Estes.
Aye.
Representative Estes votes aye. Representative Featherstone.
Featherstone votes no.
My apologies. Representative Featherston votes no. Representative Murphy.
Aye.
Representative Murphy votes aye. Representative Orr. Representative Orr votes aye. Representative Poskin. Representative Poskin votes no. Representative Samsel.
Aye.
Representative Samsel votes aye. Representative Sanders.
Aye.
Representative Sanders votes aye. Representative Schreiber.
No.
Representative Schreiber votes no. Representative Wolf Moore.
No.
Representative Wolf Moore votes no. Representative Thomas. Aye. With 11 votes in favor and 6 noes, the amendment passes.
All right, committee. Now that we have the balloon passed, I'm going to make the motion that we pass out House Bill 2039, I think, 2039 favorably as amended. Second from Representative Murphy. Further discussion. Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'll be voting no on this, and again, I think that the basic thing is we are becoming involved in curriculum development here, and that is not our purview. This Kansas State Board of Education is an elected organization to deal with these kinds of issues. And I've talked to 2 of the members of the Board of Education just very recently. They are both adamantly against this. And again, it feels like the legislature is encroaching on their responsibilities and their purview of office. And we are looking at dictating what kind of test is used in our American government classes and so on. That's getting pretty darn picky about what our responsibilities are as far as public education in Kansas. And again, I think, we have organizations, the teachers organization wants the best for our kids. The administrators want the best for our kids. The Kansas Association of School Boards wants the best for our kids. Our Kansas State Board of Education wants the best for our kids. And they all oppose this bill. I mean, we had them in here to talk about this. They all oppose this bill. And part of it is because this is already being done, and now we are telling our teachers, you have to do it our way. I think this is bad legislation, and I think this is a terrible precedent to set for the legislature to involve itself to this degree in developing curriculum and telling our teachers what to do in the classroom. I'll be opposing this. Thank you.
Representative Sampson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I frequently agree with the former speaker here, but I starkly disagree with him here. I mean, to use the word dictating something means that we're actually forcing something on our teachers and our kids. And as one of the previous speakers mentioned, I don't know how this could be much more of a watered down version. I don't know that those are my exact word choice if I had more time to think about it, but this still gives a lot of flexibility to our teachers. And my biggest objection to this thing at the outset where I could not support it was the $400,000 fiscal note. And I hope our good friends in the media report that this has zero fiscal impact if the teachers and our local school administrators and our experts in the field so choose to go about that way, which I hope they do. And then I guess my closing comment here is I have not gotten any real impression from our friends and generally they're experts. I appreciate what they do. Both on the State Board of Education, but I know they haven't knocked all the doors in my district and from Garnett to Osawatomie to Wellsville. And I do believe the people in my district would support something like this because I don't think we're doing a very good job in our civics right now, not because we're not trying, but I think this gives us good feedback and information that we as a legislature and working with our friends over in the Board of Education can use this information moving forward. And then I guess my closing comment is we would not be, even though I disagree with the characterization of dictating something, I do believe that if our friends across the street or down across Kansas gave us a better proposed alternative, we wouldn't be dictating or passing any legislation here today, whether it's through a resolution or through legislation. So I actually am going to support this bill today, and I do hope the conversation continues. I have absolutely no doubt that our chairman's willing to continue that conversation, and frankly, I think our friends across the street will continue that. And so, although this is not in perfect form, and I wish it was in perfect form before we passed it out of this committee, I feel like we've been left with no other choice if we're actually going to get something done on this. So those are my closing comments. I appreciate everybody's dialogue on this today, regardless of where they stand on it, because I know we all share most of the same goals at the end of the day. So I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Comments from the committee? I will state that it is my goal to continue. Just like Kansas, the Civics Advocacy Network has great potential, but is still voluntary. When I went over to the state board, I made the comment to them about Kansas CAN, which is the moonshot from Mercury 1 to Apollo 2. And that has been in place for about 6 years also. And I said, we're still getting limited participation. I said, if the state board would like to work with me and the legislature, I would be glad to give them some motivation through statute to get more buy-in to what I believe is a very well-intended and good set of reforming education in the state of Kansas, but it's just not being utilized because at the local level, some school districts don't feel like they need to embrace it. And so I said, hey, work with me. There's so much other than just this civics class that I want the legislature to be involved working with the state board. I do want to tear down the walls between the two organizations. I joked that I am no Ronald Reagan and I'm not going to make any bold declarations, but I'm going to do what I can. I offered my services as a liaison between the legislature and the state board, and they took up my offer. I will continue to do what is best for our kids through cooperation and communication. I believe this is a small step in doing that. I appreciate that we had a great hearing, and even today we're having good discussion, and hold me accountable to what I have just said. With that being said, based on the previous vote, I'm not going to do a roll call. I'm just going to simply ask members to, as we vote, to raise their hands. And without further questions, I don't want to cut it off, but I am going to go ahead and call the question. Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your right hand. Sampson is raising his hand. Go ahead and check the other room.
Mr. Chairman, can you see in here?
Well, that's where we're gonna go check your hands. Ten, and then I'll go ahead and I'm 11. Those opposed, to raise your hand.
I'd like my vote recorded, please.
Okay, for those who, are all those opposed voting no, wishing to have their vote recorded? Okay. 6. For those voting yay, I'm going to have that recorded too without objection. That was the second.
Yes, I'd like my vote recorded yay.
All votes will be recorded, and it's the same vote that took place on the Bloom Amendment. With that being said, the bill passes out favorably. Thank you, committee. I know it's 5 till. I will tell you, I like to have fun sometimes, and Deborah helped me to put together what I call is a wolf pack member. The Kansas City Star said I was a lone wolf, and Derek Schmidt, I said, was a part of my wolf pack. For those who voted yes, you are a part of my wolf pack. I will also say to those who voted no today, it's all good. You get a participation pack award if you so desire to have that. What is cost?